Migrating to Australia, the podcast, but today it's the live stream. I'm Grant Williams.
I'm David Bongiorno.
I'm not
today. No, we've got someone very interesting this Saturday. Louis Foo is studying a master's in social work at Monash University in Caulfield, but he's also a punk rocker.
Now, David, before we go any further, before I say hello to Mr. Foo, remember the material contained within this broadcast
is not legal advice. Do not rely upon it for legal advice.
Rely on it and treat it as specific legal advice. David, what are you? That's correct. You are a galah or a drongo. Welcome.
Come and see me. Sorry, mate. If you want specific advice, come and make an appointment. We'll talk about it. But today is to enlighten and inform.
Mr. It's Benny would have liked that. We were talking over each other again here.
The secret code.
Yeah. Oh, well, it could be like, shut up.
But the cool person between you and I on the stream is a social work, a master's student in social work and a punk. Louis Foo, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
How did you get into punk?
I got into punk in secondary school.
Because Shonen Knife and the Ramones are bloody awesome.
Oh, yeah, great band.
Oh, we're on the right side today, Louis, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Because I could say to David, hey, David, what did you think of Burning Farm?
And I'd say,
you'd look at me just like that, wouldn't you? Oh, no, you've let me down. Shonen Knife's fantastic album, Burning Farm. You're probably going to tell me that Green Day are the essence of punk.
No, I would say I'm into punk. I play in a punk band, but I grew up around like a lot of grunge, a lot of industrial, a lot of post-punk, like Joy Division, Nine Inch Nails. Like, yeah, pretty gothic.
How did you get into it in secondary school?
I was just a really weird kid. I never really fit in. I was always had a lot of passion and fury, and it was fate, I feel. It was really fate.
Need to set the scene a bit, though, because where did you go to secondary school, Lewis?
I went to school in Singapore.
Right.
International school or
local? Both international and local school.
So there's not a lot of punk bands on TV in Singapore, are there?
No.
What is the music scene like in Singapore?
I grew up in it, so I guess it's a bias, but it's actually pretty fun. It's a bit of a small town scene. It's hard. How do I say this? It's very competitive and it's very small. So, it's much like the rest of Singapore.
Well, Singapore is beautiful. It's a perfect little state. You have to be careful about what you sing about in Singapore, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, I actually used to organize shows back home, and part of the application to get the shows approved was that we had to send lyrics from the bands to the government, and they had to vet them out.
How long would the vetting take? How long would that take?
Oh, it's been a while since I did it, but it would take up to a month, really.
Oh, so you really have to plan ahead for the gigs.
Yeah, and you don't really make much money off them, to be honest.
Now,
not from local bands.
Didn't Kylie Minogue get banned from Singapore when she was in the hot pants phase?
Oh, I mean, I'm not surprised. They banned everyone.
Yeah.
I think Metallica wasn't supposed to. They got banned because they drank beer on stage, so they didn't come back until 2013, I think. Yeah.
Well, they weren't yanked off the stage. They were allowed to finish their concert, and then they were banned, or what happened?
I think somewhere along those lines, where they were just told nicely, they're like, "Hey, what you did was kind of, dangerous to our society's moral fabric," all those usual excuses.
At least they didn't cut the power halfway through the gig.
So fun.
I was watching Star TV. You remember Star?
I remember Star TV, yeah.
Yeah, and Nicky Beattie was interviewing an activist who was anti-Gandhi, and he said something offensive about Gandhi, and Murdoch cut him off midstream. So at least Metallica wasn't cut off midstream.
Yeah, for morals reasons, Murdoch cuts them off for political reasons.
We won't go into Murdoch. He's an evil man. But Louis, tell me something. Singapore, secondary school, were you given violin, piano, singing lessons? How did you get into music? And I mean, the segue into punk is quite dramatic.
Well, I didn't really grow up in a musical family. None of my parents really encouraged me to play music. So I think punk rock made a lot of sense to me because it was just very do-it-yourself. It was very raw. You didn't have to sing really good or play really good. And yeah, it was the best part.
But you're a chill dude. You come across, we've met before, we've spoken before. We often, neophytes such as myself, associate rage with punk. You're very chilled.
I think the chillness is, I think it's me being civilized after living in Australia for like a few years. It's a bit of a professional persona, I feel. Who I really am inside. I'm quite a angry guy.
A lot of punk, David, is not about rage, and it's certainly not about violence, but punk's really a lot about awareness. And if you, I mean, a lot of criticism of punk is just stupid because people don't actually know what the content is about.
When I think of punk, I think of hard skin.
But see, that hardcore, that US surfy hardcore, and the flip side of it, which was the whole straight edge movement in the US, a lot of that was just bonkers, and it was a very hard, aggressive style of music. But when I write down my list of punk bands, almost none of that scene make it into my list of punk bands. I mean, punk bands were The Clash, the Sex Pistols, and then you build from there. America had the Ramones,
The Cramps.
Yeah,
like one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, well, the Cramps, they were unbelievable. I saw you; they were unbelievable. But again, they're a totally different scene. But all this, the stuff I think you're thinking of, David,
it's hardcore punk.
But it came out of Black Flag. But
AC. I mean, that's a shocker of a song. All coppers are.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this idea. No, AC. That's the name of the song. All coppers are. There's a big UK. I mean, as I said, I'm a neophyte. Can you give me the potted history of punk from your perspective as a young Singaporean studying social work here? How do you keep in touch with the scene? Explain it to us at a local and national level so those listening get an idea of what it's about. Can you do that?
Yeah. Well, punk, I think you guys were just going on about what is and what is not punk, but I think everything can be punk. Anything is punk. Punk is what you make it to be. Anyone can be punk. I feel there's so much levels of punk, and also punk exists within low fidelity and DIY subculture. So anyone can do it. So to me,
David, in the legal fraternity, David's a punk.
Yeah, it's an attitude. Do it yourself and be critical. Being critical of the information that you consume, being critical of the food you consume, and being critical of just the status quo. I think that's punk. And being socially aware, being socially switched on, and knowing that anger, sadness, and all these emotions, they're natural and normal, and music, they should be expressed through any medium that you can get your hands on, including music, art. And so on the local level, I feel, with that said, there's so many punk bands in Singapore. And I mean, I can talk about Melbourne, I can talk about Singapore. Which one do you want me to talk about?
Talk about Singapore, because that's where you're exposed. That's where you I mean, how many bands have you had now? You've got a band here.
Yeah, I have 2 bands here, and I had a few bands back home, but they were pretty trash.
That's punk. Isn't that the essence of punk then?
Hell yeah.
Mum and Dad, what did they say when they found their boys a punk rocker?
They didn't say much because they weren't really around much of the time.
And so you've got, I mean, explain your educational background. You're doing a master's at one of the 3 best unis in the country, Monash. What's your bachelor's in? What you take your bachelor's in?
I'm actually doing a bachelor's in social work. Yeah.
All right. Now, what's the story with the social work? Do you find it as a stress release, the punk music?
I find, like, growing up as an unconventional kid, as someone who didn't fit in, I, wouldn't want to go into that much, but I was with foster parents for a bit. And I really felt that was really confusing time for me. And it really shaped, I feel my childhood and my teenage years really shaped a really large part of my life, like who I am, like just an outsider, an instigator, an activist. I'm working on like the last one, activist. It's hard when you're not a citizen yet. But, I find, that's why I wanted to be a social worker, because I wanted to help people that were just, who didn't fit in, like me. Yeah.
So you have an empathy. And how many placements have you done to date with your social work?
2. First one was for a not-for-profit organization working for asylum seekers.
Fantastic.
That was really eye-opening.
Which can you, without really identifying them, was that with a fairly high-profile guy on Twitter?
We were a pretty high-profile organization, but I wouldn't say guy.
It wasn't with...
No, mate.
No, I wasn't with anyone on Twitter.
Yeah. I
mean, with your placements, so people understand what you do in social work, you had a placement with the asylum seekers. Where was the second placement?
Right now, I'm working in a research-based placement, and we're researching about sustainable living and environmental responsibility in human service organizations. So it's
no human contact, no helping people directly in that placement.
Well, we are contacting organizations. We call up organizations and we have conversations with them to just assess their climate change position and responsibility. Like for some organizations they use OSPAs, which is recycling food from Woolies and Coles, I believe. So these are all things that we consider environmentally responsible, and we are just kind of collating information and just sussing out where Australia itself is with climate responsibility and climate change. Not the best.
What are the ways you guys are figuring through your research so we can improve?
Well, I feel okay. One example I'll give is that one of the people I interviewed, she grew up in rural Thailand. And this is a manager for a pretty high-profile organization. I'm not going to identify her, obviously. She grew up in rural Thailand, and she would weave baskets out of leaves, and she would use those baskets to go to the markets, every weekend, and she would reuse those baskets. So those baskets were reused. It wasn't like plastic bags you can take off a shelf and throw away and dispose. And she expressed great discontentment basically we came in late, so late to that reusable game. Hard to say. It's hard to say.
It's really depressing, actually, Louis, because if you try and make the choice to reduce your plastic consumption and you shop at a supermarket, you just don't have a chance. You just don't have a chance because everything is packaged that way. Hey, before we go more into your punk and social work, I want to come back on the migration train. When you were at high school in Singapore, what made you choose Australia, and what was the process you went through?
Well, it was a pretty hard. My teenage years were pretty hard. Like my parents were pretty absent. Just a lot of stuff, and I also felt and I fell through the cracks in the Singaporean system. Like I really tried my best. Like I was in an international school before, but I got expelled for like something, and then so I landed myself in a government school, which was really rough, to be honest, because I was given a Western education, and now I'm being like put through the same grinder everyone was, and it made me really I don't remember most of those. I do remember them, but it was just I was just consumed with a lot of rage and sorrow, really. Yeah.
What's the grinder like? You mentioned it was a grinder for local kids doing the local education who can't go to an international school. What do you mean? What's it like?
Well, the grinder is that highly competitive. Singapore's a small place. Look, I admit we're one of the most privileged nations in Asia, and I will always know that of my privilege growing up there. But obviously bad things can happen in good places, and as part of Singapore's kind of rush to modernize and like everywhere else, I think we've really forgotten the essence of being human, and human beings make mistakes, and human beings are failable, and human beings are not perfect. But when you go through the Singaporean education system, perfection is a prerequisite, and I wasn't perfect and no one is, but we had to be perfect and we had to be flawless, and we had to get straight grades, because even if I missed the cutoff for a course by 1 mark, that was it. I couldn't get, and that would determine at 16 years old, that would determine the rest of my life, what I would study.
A lot of pressure to deal with. A lot of pressure to deal with as a 16-year-old. Yeah. I imagine it was a bilingual education as opposed to an English language education in the English school. Was it bilingual at local school?
I was bilingual in both schools. It was a compulsory, which I give them a lot of credit for. But it was hard to speak Chinese a lot when I was listening to a lot of American bands.
Which Chinese is spoken in Singapore?
Mandarin. But we have dialects. But I guess we speak it within our own family units. It's not really encouraged to in public spaces.
Do you consider yourself English speaker first or Mandarin speaker first?
English speaker.
So, Louis, we were getting there. Why Australia against all the other options?
Well, I think part of why I didn't really fit in Singapore as well was that I actually didn't really take myself too seriously. I really didn't. It's a bit of a joker, really. It was weird. I was like an aggro punk joker, anarchist type. I would just I'd be full of fury, but in a comedic way. And people just took everything so seriously. I mean, for good reason. I mean, look, I don't know why they did really, because you could go through school and life and have a bit of a cynical gaze on it and just have a laugh about it. But I felt Australian, obviously there's complexities to Australian culture and there's pluses and minuses as well that I'm considering. But I really like how Australians would speak about themselves or to each other. Just, we're playful from what I'm, this kind of people I'm around with as well, because I saw that. So obviously there's difference, there's different kinds of Australians, but
like I can call David a dickhead, but I'm not really insulting him.
In this country.
But if I say, "Oh, that Dave, God, he's such a dickhead," then then I'm insulting him.
It means the same thing sometimes.
But to be an anarchist in Singapore is to be marked and to be given a rough time, obviously. So how did you cope with that? I mean, you can't buck the system because the system is so tight and smooth and well run.
Well, actually, a lot of my friends, they have gotten in trouble for speaking up, and I'm kind of glad I haven't, because that's obviously on my criminal record, and I don't really want, just for speaking up. It was hard, and I think part of my journey in Australia was finding that voice, because I had it then. I just was too afraid to speak it. But now I think, given the privilege of living in a Western country and being given the privilege to experience Western education, and not only that, a critical Western education, and the circles of people around with who are also very critical and very, critical of systematic things. I think I'm being given the tools to find a voice, and I'm slowly finding that.
You write your own songs?
Yeah. Sorry, Grant, what are you going to say?
That point about a critical education, I'm interested in what you mean by that compared to some of the other education system options that might have been available to you. Because I think obviously I've had that education. I think it's been pretty good, but I'm not sure a lot of Australians value the kind of education that they get, certainly in upper secondary and at university level. So why did you pick Australia against some of the other, Canada, New Zealand, England?
I find Canada and New Zealand to be, frankly, it was the closest to me, and I just want to get out.
Okay. That's perfectly valid.
Like Canada and New Zealand, they're, reasonably progressive as well, but Australia was big and vast and endless, and I wanted to disappear.
You chose Melbourne to be as far away from Singapore as possible.
Irony is abound in human existence.
So coming from your year 12 or your leaving year or whatever, what's it called in Singapore, into Australia? How was that process? Was it difficult?
Yeah, it was. I feel, because actually I didn't really do well in school at all. I finished it, but I got the lowest 20th percentile in the entire country, so I couldn't go to university in Singapore. So basically I was stuck there for a few years, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and those were really dark years of my life.
Does that fuel your material? The material you write?
It's all some way about me dealing with, growing up there and coming here and realizing I don't really fit in here as well. So
did that make you something of a symbol in the punk scene in Singapore? Did you ever get feedback that people could empathise with your work and understand the background being of Singaporean descent?
I think I have a lot of friends back home in Singapore who are following me in Australia and following my journey, because before I was in the band, I was a photographer and I've been on tour and stuff. It's been so fun. I was just So
do they see themselves in your work? Obviously your friends would have a similar view of Singapore. Do you provide a catharsis for them, something that they can relate to and let off steam to?
Yeah, I think a lot of them see me as the person who got out, and I'm always I know I'm lucky.
Being here in Australia, though, has dulled your edge or heightened and honed your edge? Because are you as angry now as you were back home?
No, but I feel when I do things, I feel I'm still guided by a lot of passion. Not so much aggression these days, but passion. But I'm very precise with it now, and I know not exactly what I'm doing, but exactly where I want to put this energy, because it's powerful. It's my strength.
I was going to go down the punk road again. Where does a punk band play gigs in Melbourne these days?
Anywhere where you can plug into a wall, I think.
Are there venues? I'm just trying to get some familiarity.
The Toad on Johnson Street, the Toad, the Bendigo, Bar Open, Nighthawks, everywhere. I think like I said, punk is very diverse, and I feel some venues cater to a different kind of punk than the other. Bendigo Hotel is more metal, heavy metal, but punk bands play there. The Toad is definitely a punk venue. Punk, indie, like alternative. It's a place for all the weirdos. I love it.
The punks have.
I was reading one of your press releases, sludge. I love the word sludge. What is sludge punk?
Sludge punk it's slow and it's heavy, and they use a lot of distortion. And I guess we are kind of sludge punk.
So if the Cramps came out now, would they be a sludge band?
I think they would just be a post-punk band. I feel like I don't know. I've always loved his persona on stage, so flamboyant and androgynous. I do connect with that.
Or the scientists, the early scientists, would they have been a sludge band?
The early scientists, no. I think sludge is something that like came out with heavy metal, with like bands like Black Sabbath. I feel like those were very proto sludge, stoner doom. Yeah.
When I listen to Sabbath nowadays, the early Sabbath, they're just a straight ahead rock and roll band, like really good
bands now. Like they just rock. Like they were heavy back then. That was like 4 years ago.
But yeah. Now, what would be a comparable venue to the Tote in Singapore or anywhere else that you're aware of in Asia?
Well, there's this venue called the Substation in Singapore, and it's an art space run by the punks, and they host all kinds of events, galleries, like zines, like design fairs, and all these kind of support is, I feel, in my opinion, is true purpose. Which
Similar kind of size.
It's big. It's big. You can fit like 300 people in there. That's big for Singapore.
You mentioned the government censors or wants to approve the lyrics and not go counter to Singaporean values. What do they frown on, and what are you able to get away with subversively? How do you convey your message in a way that people get without offending the censors?
I think it's like you're telling like a story, like hypothetically, there's this guy who on this hypothetical island, he's hypothetically angry with how it's run, and he's hypothetically writing a song about it sarcastically about this supposed regime.
When you say you got a government approved set of lyrics for one of your songs, I mean, then you changed it. How would they know? Do they come to the venues to make sure you honour your promise to perform the sanitized lyrics?
They do. So
Jeez.
That's a big risk. Like they'll just honestly, it's volatile. Like there could be a venue there, and a bunch of people move in there, knowing that's a venue, and complain about noise, and that's it. We're done. Because I think, unfortunately, I mean, this is the same for other states in Australia, except Melbourne. But I don't think the government views arts as essential, whereas the Victorian government does, and I think it's a great thing. So yeah, it's very volatile.
How far do you finish your degree? When do you finish your social work degree?
End of this year, hopefully.
And you're looking to make application for temporary residency and then permanent residency?
Yep.
Hey, David, we just did a podcast about that.
We did indeed last week. In terms of jobs, you're bilingual, you're very switched on, you've got empathy. I don't foresee you having any difficulty getting social work. Have you got any work lined up?
Not at the moment. I'm just trying to finish up my placement, but I've been working throughout my degree, so I have a lot of work experience.
So in the social space, in the social welfare space?
Yeah. We've been doing a lot of volunteering as well. It's been pretty broad, so I'm just going to see what comes my way when I graduate. Right now, I think I really need to just focus on my studies. It's so much happening right now.
How are you coping with it online?
I get out a bit, wear a pair of jeans, and I guess I'm out the house in my head.
Has school set any deadline date to return to class studies, or is it still up in the air?
Still up in the air. Basically, we're commencing everything. I think the rest of this year is going to be online, so I think it's going to be pretty weird.
You'll have no problems with the IELTS test. You'll kill that, and that's often the arts or the back.
I've done the PTE.
How'd you go?
I got 80 in every first attempt.
Lovely. That's very, very nice. That's good to hear. Where do you, in 5 years' time, where do you see yourself in the social work hierarchy? Do you see yourself on the field, in the office?
It's hard to say because I think I do know I want to affect change in some manner. I do want to help people, and I just need to go into the field as a qualified social worker and navigate it. Frankly, at the moment, like I'm quite interested in digital media, so and my band obviously in music. So I'm just gonna see how it goes because like it's all gonna connect at one point in time. I have a feeling. So yeah.
So I'm guessing, Louis, that long-term aim is citizenship here?
Yeah, in Australia.
The only problem with that being a good Singaporean, you've ultimately got to make a choice between the Singaporean passport and the Australian passport.
I know what I'm going to choose. So
Well, we won't go into that in case people in Singapore are listening.
yeah.
Les Twentyman. Have you heard about Les Twentyman?
No, who is he? Sorry.
Les Twentyman, what would you say, Grant? He's the sort of most high-profile social worker in Melbourne?
Well, he was is a social worker based. I think he was in Braybrook, and I think I've got that right. I'm sure he was working Altona, Footscray, Braybrook, and he's been a constant figure in the media for close on 30 years, I'd reckon.
Easy, absolutely.
Always standing up for the battler and for pointing out the inequalities that have not been
and getting out on the ground as well. So while he's a very senior social worker and has a lot of input into policy, he's out there talking to people on the streets, never losing the common touch.
Now, I don't know if you guys can see that, but someone's just given us a thumbs up, a like on Facebook. Thank you very much.
Oh, just had a look. Thank you very much for that.
Louis, have you noticed the inequalities that are becoming more and more evident in Australian society?
Australia is not a perfect place, and I'm not coming in here rose-colored glasses. Like, I know, this country is a very unequal place, and it's especially crazy, especially reading about the treatment of the First Nation peoples in Australia. I think that's an absolutely terrible thing. They have genocide basically, and yeah. Well, actually, in my social work degree, my drummer, he grew up in rural Gippsland, so he grew up in the country in Victoria.
Which town?
Wouldn't want to get into too much detail.
I used to live in Gippsland. That's
somewhere near Churchill. Yeah, it was pretty bad. And basically, like, I met him in class, and we just looked at each other like, "Do you like weird music?" And yeah, he's like, "Yeah." And that was the start of my band. But my story was that before this band started, he lived in Gippsland, and he would travel 3 hours every day on the V line to Footscray to my uni to go to class. He grew up in extreme inequality, and these towns are weird, man. These country towns are weird.
Yeah.
And but I just saved up enough money to buy my first car, like a cheap one. And he was like, "Hey, Louis, come to my farm and jam with me and my friends." So I drove to Gippsland to this farm to jam with him for his birthday. And I met some people. But it didn't stop me. I thought they were interesting, so I started hanging out with them in his town, all his little townsfolk. And it was a good year of me going to Gippsland to hang out with these people in this really poor town that he grew up in. And in the end, I had to stop hanging out with them. But I saw wow, this is crazy. This is beyond what I would experience living in Melbourne. This is real Australia. Poverty, drugs, alcohol, everything. It was crazy, and it was just and the people just grow up like that. It was crazy.
And Louis, the sad thing is that the government wants international students who graduate to take jobs and work in these areas out of Melbourne, out of Sydney, out of Brisbane, in such places. Do you think there is opportunity for them, international students, to work in places like this?
There's opportunity everywhere if you know where to look. But I think it's how would someone not from these towns understand what's going on?
Yeah.
And all those who can, they leave these towns and move to the city.
But most people who live in Melbourne, I mean, you mentioned a word earlier on, Louis, about your position in Singapore of being privileged. You recognised that where you were. Here in Australia, most people who are suburban do not recognise their privilege and would not be able to relate to the lives of people living on the fringes in rural Australia, and they certainly don't recognise the amount that they owe to the first Australians. I mean, the wealth of nearly everybody in Australia is an inverse relationship to the privilege that they have and that the first Australians don't have. And it's a student would be expected to come to grips with that in the region quickly.
It's not something that you can learn in 2 years on a 491. It's not something you can. You have to know the history of this country. Every single thing that happened, you need to know, because it's all a big story. It's not black and white.
It's a complicated place.
It is. Everywhere is complicated.
Yeah.
What have you learned from the way Singapore look after their less fortunate that we could adopt here? Are there anything that you'd like to see adopted here that Singapore practices in looking after disadvantaged?
There is a really big inequality in Singapore as well. And homeless people in Singapore, they get jailed pretty quick because it's legal to be homeless. So there are support systems, there is welfare. They're very selective about who they give it to. So only the worst of the worst. I mean, I think, welfare should be accessed by anyone who falls on hard times. Debatable as well, like, because obviously I'm going to the welfare state argument. But frankly, I'm growing up in Singapore, and this could be just my brief 20 years there. I have really not seen much support for people who are disadvantaged in Singapore. I mean, besides the community organizations, which are mostly racially based as well. So there's no centralized kind of like, if you need help, this way you can go. And also, mental health wasn't considered an essential service during the lockdown in Singapore. So, I think we're, the priorities are clear. We want productive people, not, I mean, same with Australia, do you know what I mean? But like, it's, frankly, I just don't see any solution where Singapore can be used in this case. I mean, thanks for stealing our MyKey system, but yeah.
If we wound back the clock, would you do it again? Come to Australia? Are you happy with your decision so far?
I am. I mean, despite everything. And also because I am kind of hyping myself up because I've invested so much time in this country. I have amazing friends around me. I have amazing, compassionate, people around me who, I realize a lot of people in Singapore also have experienced a traumatic upbringing like I have, but we don't really talk about it. So when I came here, I started talking about it a lot, and I realized, wow, everyone's good stuff going on, and it's whether you want to face it and have a conversation about it and be vulnerable about it, then you can start working on it with the help of your peers.
That's absolutely, I agree with that totally. It's a great call.
It's been me 5 years being vulnerable here and being open and trying to forge a new life for myself. And it feels so much, honestly, I'm really happy here. Like everything that is in my life now, I went out and got it. It's not something that like, nothing in my life is unconscious. Everything here is a conscious decision because I'm allowed to be in control of my life. People in Singapore don't usually move out their homes until they get married. So I think independence, we're always very cool. It's good as well because I feel the West could use a bit more collectivism where we care for each other and care for our family. So, it's like it's always a double-edged sword. When you talk about these issues, very complex. So, yeah. Yep.
You've got drive, you've got hunger. I can't wait to see you progress through the system. You're very switched on. Immigration is tough in this country. The scores you need to achieve are very high. But if anyone's going to do it, it's got to be you, Louis. Thanks for coming, mate.
Thanks, David. And thanks, Grant. Yeah.
Louis, you don't get away that early. I've still got one question. Sometimes, recently we've been seeing some pretty ugly stuff in the media as a result of attitudes to the origins of COVID. Now, have you found Australians generally to be accepting, and have you had any of those issues that often crop up with Asian Australians?
In the cities, I would say, pretty progressive, especially in Melbourne. But when I was out in the country, and I've spent a lot of time out there because I'm in a band. He doesn't live there anymore. But when the band first started, I used to go there and write with him. Wow, that's crazy. It's so casual as well. They just slip it underneath you, ho 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 ho. So I would say I'm very lucky to live in Melbourne, but you got to be kidding yourself if you went to say this country is a bit R-word.
I've got no problem saying it. I think one of the greatest failings of modern Australia is its inability to face up to the fact that it has been, since its very origin, its very inception as a country, was based on race, on the assumption that one weren't even here, that a 60,000-year-old culture had no value and did not exist. And from then on, we've been exploiting different races right through the period of our history. Most of those people who were exploited have integrated and been successful. But exploitation...
I had a few fights in the playground in the 70s for being half Italian, a smelly wog. So I used to have... I know what you're talking about. I used to have a few playground biffos.
Bloody wog.
So I used to get the fists flying. So one I used to get was, you smelly wog. And so I understand that.
A Cabanossi boy.
It's been around a long time, and it's an unfortunate legacy.
And you're quite right, Lewis. It's casualised, and it's casualised with a chuckle, which then sort of
That's my two-year-old dachshund who is very vocal, not calling me, just barking and barking. But look, come back again when you're on temporary residency. We'll talk some more.
Yeah.
You've been great, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Don't disappear so quick, Lewis, because I want to ask you something, but I'll do our outros. David, this has been an unusual episode for our sort of format. I don't think we've been a bit controversial, but this has been a bit more of a emotional and emotive.
It's been a fantastic podcast, and Lewis has been a great guest, and it's really nice to get some insight into the Australian experience from someone who's been here for a few years now, calling it like he sees it. Particularly, I found particularly interesting and insightful Lewis's commentary on country life.
And if somebody would like to follow in the footsteps of our long-haired Singaporean punk, how should they do that, David? What's the best thing for someone who is thinking of migrating? What should they do?
Reach out to me on Twitter at Dave Bongiorno, Bongiorno, all one word, or Grant, the podcast website.
Migrating to Australia podcast.com, soon to have a revamp. We're in the middle of it, so its clunky nature will soon be a thing no more. It will be in the internet history of what not to do, and David will be front and centre on our new homepage.
I'm doing lots of water running, Grant, so I know who's chubby.
So, mate, make an appointment with David on our new australiapodcast.com web. Thanks for being part of our story today. It's felt very different today, David, very relaxed.
Well, Lewis is a very chilled guy, and the vibe permeates the podcast. It'll be good listening.
Well, cheers, everyone.
Ciao.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lewis.